Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick, founder of Herbal 411, and the video today is on the Ozempic craze and the Wegovy craze and the Zepbound or the Mounjaro craze. I'm pointing to these things because I have a few samples of that family of GLP-1 agonists, and essentially those are medicines that have been around for a while, but they didn't really get popular until because they were for diabetes. All this stuff is for diabetes except for these two. It was introduced, I think, in around the millennium, and most of the primary cares didn't want to touch that because insulin was big back then as far as bringing down people's glucose levels. But unfortunately, since then, it's been a little bit of a concept that's been flipped over where insulin, although it brings down your glucose levels quickly, especially in an injection shot, it actually causes you to gain weight, which defeats the purpose of controlling diabetes, especially if diabetes is associated with weight, which brings us back to this obesity crisis and why these things are so popular. So no question that there's always going to be issues with what came first, obesity or bad food, and they both go together. Unfortunately, a lot of the hyper-palatable foods that we have that are ultra-processed, those are two big buzzwords, they make you want to psychologically have those foods, even if you're not hungry. I can't tell you the amount of times I go to a movie theater and you get this bottomless bucket with refills because you'll save money. And by the time the second act is starting, I'm down to the bottom of a large family-sized bucket. And then the guilt that follows that can happen with potato chips, family-sized chips and guac. All these comfort foods. Don't even talk about some of the desserts that are out there that are almost bottomless. Even if you're full from your entree, once you see the picture that they present to you here, or if they bring the models out, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so full, but I'll have that thing right there, and 2 pounds of it. We have this fixation with hyperpalatable foods that have low value in fuel and highly processed. And the food industry knows psychologically that if somebody takes a hyperpalatable food, puts them in their mouth, you're going to have a plethora of different hormones that come from that exposure. So we are prisoner to food technology. With that being said, I think there is an obesity crisis. And with obesity, technically you're overweight right after 25. And once you hit 30, you're obese. But we have a lot of people moving into that over 30 BMI. And the BMI is a rough estimate. I don't like it. I'd rather use waist to hip ratio, or I'd rather use a DEXA scan to look at body composition, muscle mass, visceral fat, and other things. But the idea that I wanted to bring by you is the understanding of how to use things properly. My patients that start either the injectables of the GLP-1s or the orals, and there are oral GLP-1s for those of you who don't like injection, but the injection is a piece of cake. Whether you use the typical Ozempic or Wegovy, I don't have a tirzepatide here, I don't think, but it doesn't matter. Zepbound and Mounjaro are the newer kids on the block as far as GLP-1s, and they have the action of these guys help with one factor. The Zepbound and Mounjaro help with 2 factors. I believe the data that's coming out now says that they do better with weight loss and sustainability. As far as the oral medicine, Rybelsus, people are pretty bad with taking pills, so it's not that popular. But if you can't get one covered, then Rybelsus does have a coupon online if you have insurance. You can't be Medicaid or Medicare. Most of the Zepbounds, the Mounjaros, the Ozempics, that too, will have coupons online. They'll give you a couple weeks to months for free. And then hoping, obviously, that you will buy into that, and then you'll be their prisoner for life. And truly, if you look at the data when tirzepatide, that's Mounjaro, was just being released, somebody of a representative was saying that we expect that this will be a great success with regards to diabetes reversal. However, patients will most likely be on it for life. And it was declared back then, but I think they've striked that out of the verbiage because nobody wants to be on anything for life. But here's the caution. When you're using a GLP-1 to reduce cravings, and slow down your gut and get a little bit of constipation, which means that your stomach is also emptying out slower and a slower emptying stomach keeps you fuller for a longer amount of time. In addition to sensitizing the small intestine, the large intestine with more hormone than usual. So they do work, but if you do that only and you don't psychologically change around how your approach to food and nutrition as fuel for the exercise you're supposed to be doing and activities of the week you're supposed to be doing, if you don't change that around, you will be using these things for life. If you look at what happens about basal metabolic rate, the biggest loser phenomenon was when there was a study of the biggest losers that graduated or won each competition, and they would never bring them back for the next year's series. I think there was question about why don't we see the old winners. If you look at the long-term data on people who lose massive amounts of weight, usually there's going to be a lowering of basal metabolic rate. So everybody has this BMR that we have, calculations online or equations online or just fill in the numbers, and you can tell it what you're supposed to be doing in calories per day to match your BMR, or basal metabolic rate. Metabolic rate, BMR, tells you what's the least amount of fuel that you need in a day to take care of regular daily processes. Now, if you're an athlete, that has to go a little higher because you're also expending more than the average person. Once you know your BMR, and everybody's slightly different, then you can target how much you're supposed to be eating per day. If you're going over your BMR, then you're eating excess. What you have to do is go either equal to or lower than your BMR and you'll be good. The problem with obesity is that if you lose massively, you'll lose weight, but your BMR will drop because the body defends itself. If you go into starvation, the body's going to think, oh, there's no food around, we better conserve energy. So your basal metabolic rate gets more efficient, and it actually decreases your need to walk. It decreases the motivation to exercise. It decreases the fidgeting that most of us do. So all those things are do them unconsciously, but when you do them unconsciously, you're active all the time. My mother-in-law used to be active everywhere, and we wondered, how does she keep her weight? She didn't really eat that much, but she also was very active versus somebody else her age in the 80s that just was sedentary, and if they ate the same amount, mother-in-law walking around like a hamster would burn that up. Somebody else might not do the same, and they would accumulate fat because the body says, we are sedentary. And when you're sedentary, as I was saying, your basal metabolic rate tries to conserve your endurance, your exercise, your motivation so that you don't go over the calories that you eat per day. So in the Biggest Loser, they dropped weight, but they also dropped BMR. And what happened was after the series was over, because their BMR dropped so low and they were still maintaining lower calories, if they ate a little bit, they started gaining weight because the BMR did not move. In fact, I believe the study was 3 years and they still had problems with bringing up the basal metabolic rate. Some people say BMR can be manipulated or is related to the gut microbiome, and that's a deeper dive for the reasons of losing weight rapidly. The GLP-1s supposedly can get you to lose about 10%. That could be up to 1 to 2 months. And the other ones, they came about the same time, are the SGLT2 inhibitors. SGLT2 inhibitors usually come in pill form. GLP-1s usually come in injection form. And these guys, the SGLT2s, they're not as popular because they probably present overall with about 2 to 5% weight loss, which is significant. They do help with decreasing the absorption of glucose and carbohydrate. So they work in a different way. In fact, these guys are different. They're not as powerful as this, but they have been approved for congestive heart failure, or heart failure in particular, especially if you get a little bit too much fluid overload. These guys make you pee. They make you pee off glucose, so the more crap you eat as far as carb and glucose, the more you're going to pee. That's why the side effect of this is to be careful about vaginal infections, urinary tract infections for males and females. And these guys just slow everything down, a different action. That's why it's more popular, and they're easier to use once a week versus every day. The problem I'll go back to when I first introduced this thing is if you only use these things to cut your appetite and that's all you're doing, you're not relearning how to have a great relationship with your food, you're not relearning how to tolerate grumbling. I call it the ghrelin growl. Ghrelin is a hormone that's secreted by the stomach when it is empty, and it's growling about a half hour before you usually eat your meal. I'm going to have my first meal at 4 o'clock, so I'm not going to eat anything for at least another 5 hours. I'm used to that. So the growling I actually like. It makes me think, okay, I'm losing weight, or I've got the ghrelin, and when ghrelin is released, growth hormone is released. That's what I'm using it for. You can manipulate all this stuff based on your motivation. My motivation is to be a healthy 70-year-old. I've got 7 years before that happens. I think I'm on my way, but you know, shit can happen. But knock on wood, at least I'm investing what I'm supposed to be investing. I won't have any remorse in case I hit a speed bump, which I did the other day. I had chest pain. I thought it was my heart. It wasn't my heart. It was my stomach. Going back to how do I control my appetite? Well, before these guys were popular, there was fasting mimicking diet. The Prolon box was by a company that was headed up by Walter Longo. He came out with the longevity diet. How you can beat cancer or make chemotherapy work better with just food and nutrition. Now a lot of people would whittle down to, they burn up all their body fat, they'd then burn up their muscle. They'd be really cachectic, emaciated. You could tell somebody is on chemotherapy. But a lot of people now, they'll lose weight massively. They'll lose weight in the form of fat, and they'll lose weight in the form of protein or muscle. And then they'll look really sick and cachectic. And you'll always ask somebody, hey, you okay? So if you can do that healthily without losing muscle, then some people will say, hey, what are you doing? You're looking good. That's what I would try to embellish in my patients. I think there's ways to do it. It's not as fast as just doing this, but going back to Prolon and the box, it's a 5-day box. I'll put a link to videos I've done in the past on this, but 5-day box, it was really big about 2015. And if you follow the rules in the 5-day box. So it was really cool, it was novel, there's a lot of information, it was hot in the news, so everybody was buying up the boxes. They used to be outrageously expensive, 200 bucks I think, now they're like 130. The difference between the shortcut, where you just cut your appetite, and the fasting is that the fasting would also trigger insulin sensitivity instead of insulin resistance. And it would trigger hormone changes to start burning up fat. And it would also give you the confidence that you can get through 1,000 calories on day 1 and 750 calories on the next 4 days. I think the accomplishment of getting through the box, which in the first round is tough, but in the ensuing rounds, because you see the effects, even if you lost weight and then gained it back, you can see the effects. You know you can get through it in 5 days. This is how I think you will survive. My suggestion would be go through the first month. Get used to feeling it. But after that, do it once a month. And these shots last for about a week. The pills, if you do these for 5 days straight and you kind of, after the first month, if you just do it for 5 days straight once a month, you get your body used to developing a different relationship, getting used to that ghrelin growl, getting used to not having food all the time, or saying, nope, I don't want that right now. I'm on a mission from Sigil, or I'm going to be training for something audacious end of this summer or end of this month. You have to have those goals of activity, which is what I do with my integrative medicine clinic. You have to have a goal. It has to be active, accumulation of a certain amount of active steps or activities per week, minutes per activity, relationship change in your food to become fuel for the muscle instead of just comfort food for taking care of being pissed off. So you change that relationship. And then you embrace sleep because you have to recover from the exercise you invested in, and the exercise is to help you with sleep. So you see this positive feedback that changes the whole scope. And I always try to get my patients to think like they're athletes. If they had no athleticism or no involvement in sports in the past, okay, we'll start up something new. Mine has always been bodybuilding and sprinting, martial arts. And I like rock climbing. Maybe I still do that into my 60s. And I plan on bringing my grandson, my new granddaughter, to the same thing in the next 7 years when I turn 70. So there are ways to change your weight. There are ways to change your concept of food and body and muscle. The other two things, these guys, these are great if you need a little bit of water off and you can't afford these, and there are coupons for these two things too. These are this is Contrave and this is topiramate. I'll have to do another video on this. These are just to fool your brain into not being hungry. But again, you got to be able to learn how to change your relationship with food. You can't just take this and lose weight and then have problems with sleep and tolerate the side effects. So hopefully this gives you a couple of ideas on how to utilize your own way if you're using these, or if you haven't invested in fasting and or food relationships. Get a registered dietitian, get a nutrition coach, get me. I'll put my link down below, but these are the true ways to be sustainable versus being a prisoner to shots and not learning about food. So hopefully this helps. If you know all this stuff and or you've done better with your own weight, please put how you lost weight in the comment section down below. Otherwise, consider subscribing, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.